2NURFM.com, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.
There's been an inquiry that's finally made its way to Newcastle, and it was taking place yesterday in City Hall, looking at the Williamtown contamination. And as I see it, there's really two things we need to sort out. Firstly, what can we do about the contamination? And secondly, how do people need to be compensated for what has happened to them? We'll leave the compensation issue to one side at the moment. But this morning we have Professor Ravi Naidu in studio with us. He is the Managing Director of the University of Newcastle's Cooperative Research Centre for Contamination Assessment and Remediation of the Environment. Welcome, Professor Naidu.
Thank you for having me on the program, Meryl.
You attended yesterday's Senate inquiry into what's happened at Williamtown. What was your assessment of the inquiry and its line of questioning?
Meryl, first thing to recognise is that we are confronted with quite a massive and serious contamination problem. And the inquiry, to my understanding, was all about getting an appreciation of when is it that we first came to know of the contamination, and should we have communicated this problem to the local communities, the risk arising from these contaminations, and what can we do to either manage or clean up the impacted environment.
And do you feel that those items were adequately covered yesterday?
I was there briefly, and what I have seen yesterday was the inquiry was quite detailed, and they were asking quite in-depth questions, and from what I have seen, yes, it was well covered.
Your centre, Professor Naidu, looks at contamination assessment and remediation. What sort of work have you done in the past on contamination and the assessment of it?
In short, CRC, which is Contamination Assessment and Remediation of the Environment, it's the only national centre of excellence in Australia, and it's globally recognised for outstanding work that we've been doing. And the work that we have been doing, on the one hand, has been about new policies or existing policies that could be underpinned by solid science, and therefore we shift away from making conservative decisions to more realistic decisions, and on the other hand, developing new innovative tools for the assessment and remediation of the contaminated environment. And so we have developed quite a number of innovative tools for which we have had national awards as well, and we've used those tools to remediate complex contaminated sites as well. Can
you give me some examples of some of those sites locally?
Locally, an example, before we moved to Newcastle, we have remediated sites in South Australia, and these sites were contaminated with chlorinated hydrocarbons. They're quite complex because many different groups, they tried to clean up, they couldn't, and that's where CRC came in handy. And we have a very strong partnership also with minerals companies, and in Western Australia, for example, Port Hedland, we have helped remediate contaminated soil there as well. And Williamtown, we've been doing some work here, and we've been on the remediating petroleum hydrocarbon contaminated groundwater as well.
Right, so now turning our attention to the Williamtown contamination, what is firstly your assessment of it, and at this early point, are we hopeful of remediation, and what might happen in that space?
Meryl, the first thing to recognise is that the environment that we are looking at, subsurface soil and groundwater, they are extremely heterogeneous and complex environment. It's just like human systems. Our systems are quite heterogeneous and complex. And so when you have subsurface contamination, the first thing to do is to see what the source of that contamination is. Once we know the source, then we have to look at groundwater, how much it is impacted, and because groundwater is not static, it moves, it will carry contaminants with it, and therefore there is a plume from the hot zone, which is where you have contamination, and then it will move in the direction of the flow of groundwater. So in Newcastle, the issues that we are confronted with is that that the impact that we have from this pollutant is quite massive. Not just the soil, but groundwater plume has spread quite a lot.
Look, thanks very much for stopping in so close to the end of term and the festive season beginning. But it's been such a massive impact on our community. It's something that, Christmas can't stop because this has impacted so many families and our environment across the region. We'll talk to you next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Meryl.
Professor Ravi Naidu, who's the Managing Director of the University of Newcastle's Cooperative Research Centre for Contamination Assessment and Remediation of the Environment. And I'm just thankful that we have such a centre of excellence located here in Newcastle. We certainly need it for this massive contamination, as the Professor just described it. It is a very complex and large area. 2NURFM.